Right. Good morning. Well, a quick talk on the wild leeks of Holm. Of course, being in Wales with our two floral symbols of daffodils and leeks, it would be lovely to have some wild leeks in Wales too. But yes. So, what about wild leeks on Holm? Well, it's well known that the wild leek is the ancestor of our cultivated leek that's thought to have originated somewhere in the Middle East. A long time ago, 4,000 years ago, and they're quite widespread in southwest Europe. And then in Britain, we've got quite a lot of records, particularly in the southwest of Britain, and a few sites which are obviously escapes from cultivation, that sort of thing elsewhere. But the opinion on its status in Britain, there are lots of different opinions. Some people say it's an introduction, an old ancient cultivar, and others say that it's native. So it's a sort of very difficult thing to really know, to be sure, based on the existing data that we've got at the moment. So there are three different taxa within the wild leek in Britain as well, just to make things a little bit more complicated. So var ampiloprasum, which is thought to be the sort of general sexual diploid, only produces flowers in its inflorescence, and that is the best known population for that is on Holm, and that's been well documented over many years. Thought to have possibly been originated from Steep Holm as well, been brought over originally, but again there's very little evidence to know one way or the other which way it went originally. Then down in southwest England, we've got var babingtonii, or Babington's leek, and that has some very nice bulbils in the inflorescence. So here you can see the head of the inflorescence, and then you get these little bulbils, which are vegetative propagules, and these are then mixed with the ordinary flowers, and we've also got flowers on the stalk, so we've got quite a loose head. And that is widespread in southwest England, and some studies on that have shown it's just one genetic clone that is not only female sterile, so it doesn't produce these seeds, but the males are sterile as well. So this is a genetically completely sterile individual that only reproduces vegetatively from the bulbils in the inflorescence. Whereas a third taxa we've got, var bulbiferum, which has very dense heads without these long things, and that occurs really in the Channel Islands as far as we know. So those are the three taxa that we have in Britain. And Babingtonia itself is quite widespread. There are very, very few records for var ampiloprasum, the original one. And again, bulbiferum, very rare, only in the Channel Islands. Well, the UK Vascular Red Data Book reported that the wild leeks were actually in decline, which sounds a bit worrying. In their sort of general review of the ecology and things, they've suggested it reproduces both by seed and by bulbils. So the bulbils would be vegetative reproduction at the base of the stem as well, rather like a garlic clove. So we know that it doesn't produce bulbils in the inflorescence head, but it does where it produces the flowers, but it does reproduce at its base. So as it was known to reproduce by seed, or thought to, I was asked to collect some seed for the Millennium Seed Bank project, which was a part of trying to fill in the big gaps in the UK flora. So as Holm is very close to Cardiff, it would be rather fun, take your daughters over for a day out, and off we went to Holm, and very, very kindly had consent from Natural Resources Wales to collect from there, because it was a site of special scientific interest. And also Marianne Bonney, the Holm warden, was very, very helpful as well. So off we went to Holm for the day. Anyone who's been to Holm, wonderful site, great fun, especially when there are no seagulls around later in the year. I was quite surprised when I got there to find that actually the wild leek was in really tight clusters. Plenty in the farmhouse, in the garden there, plenty around the visitor centre, all in very dense clusters. And then one population out on the cliffs at Jackdaw Point. So really three big centres, and there were just a couple of plants scattered miles sort of away from the others. I was really quite surprised that how clustered that distribution seemed to be, and it didn't seem to be sort of spread elsewhere. So we then started looking for seed. So this is in August. So Marianne had said they'd been flowering for about a month. Come and have a look. And there were loads of seed head presents, but there were absolutely no seed. I could see lots of bees and flies visiting the plants, but the seed still wasn't ripe. So I took 10 heads, put them in a jam jar on my windowsill and hoped that the seed would ripen. But to my surprise, no ripe seed at all. My daughters, by the way, didn't really enjoy the trip to Flatholm for some reason, and they said it was better than doing nothing. Huh. I enjoyed it. So I went back again in October to see, well, surely the seeds should be ripe now on the plants. And I looked again, and all we found was the heads were dried up and no seeds. There were tiny little white sort of half-developed ovules, but nothing else. And that was really surprising. So again, with permission, I took some of the root bulbils, so you can see how similar these look to a garlic clove. So I took some of those home and have grown them in the garden ever since. So is it because it wasn't being pollinated? Why is it not setting seed, etc.? And as a quick aside, this contrasted very much with what we'd seen on a family holiday in Portugal, where down on the sea cliffs, we find that the wild leeks can be quite frequent scattered through. And they don't occur in dense populations, they occur sort of scattered through and scattered all over the place. And when you look at the seeds here, the heads are very obvious with seeds, and they've got lots of these little black seeds, which I took a small envelope full and brought them back to cultivate for comparison. So plenty of seed set there down in what was undoubtedly its native range. So I then cultivated all 3 taxa in my garden. So Barb Abingtonii from Celiars, which flowers every year. We know it's male sterile, we know it's female sterile, only reproduces by bulbils. And again, that's exactly what we found, and no seed at all. And I've not seen any seed on that ever since I've been cultivating it since 1997. So the Flatholm plants then, they flowered every year, but I still got no seed. And exactly the same things I'd observed on Flatholm, that the ovules really didn't develop. But the Portuguese ones finally this year flowered after 4 years. So I was able actually to see how they compared, very, very similar. And nice big plants, vegetatively very, very similar, no real obvious difference. Plenty of seed in here, and I've got loads and loads of seedlings in the garden here at the moment. So these are fertile. So this is reproducing in cultivation what we saw in the wild. So I've then also been and had a quick look at the herbarium material, because that's a very good source of looking at potential seed. And I've looked at it in Natural History Museum, in Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh, and in the National Museum of Wales. And again, what I find is exactly that same pattern, that there's no seed set in British Allium and Piloprasum, but there's plenty of seed set in Europe. So this does seem to be a bit of a pattern. So what have I concluded then? So there's no seed set from the Flatholm plants at all, and I think it's a sterile clone reproducing from bulbils in the soil only. And that then explains why it's such a clustered distribution, and it's not scattered here and there across the island. So that's a bit of an implication if it's a completely sterile clone. I also didn't find any seed elsewhere in Britain, but it sets frequently in Europe. So it's very, very likely then that the wild leeks aren't wild in Britain at all. And it's already known that Barb Abingtonii and probably Vulbiferum are sterile clones of cultivated origin, because the great expert on onions, Stern, told us that. And hence, I also think that the Flatholm plants are also a sterile cultivated clone. They're an ancient vegetable. I'm very, very sorry, Matt Brown. I see you're attending and watching. I think you've got a sterile vegetable that you're looking after on Flatholm. So it's also known then, if it's a sterile vegetable, that it cannot be an ancestor of the cultivated leek, which reproduces solely by seed. So we don't have any wild leeks in Wales to go with our national Welsh floral symbol. And I also think that if it is a vegetable clone, it certainly doesn't merit less being listed in the red data book as or as a feature of scientific interest on flat Holm. It's just yet another cultivated vegetable. So in the red data book, it's worrying that it's declining. So we wonder, well, why is it declining? And the answer is very obvious. It's horrible. So Story in his Flora Cardiff says it's worthless as a vegetable, and the taste is most abominable, and it remains in the mouth for days after eating, which I can confirm. So there you are. It's a rotten old vegetable. Do we need to keep it? Thank you very much, everybody.
Brilliant, Tim. Excellent. Bang on time, I have to say. Love that last slide. Got a couple of questions just popped up in the last few seconds of your talk, so I will give you a minute to answer those briefly because we're going to try and stay to time. So Kevin Dupay asks, what is the evolutionary advantage in flowering if you don't set a seed? It seems like a waste of energy. And then he says, I guess it's got no choice until it evolves more. Is that the right answer?
Yes, pretty much, yeah. I mean, some things do manage to spread around vegetatively, but long-term evolution, you really do need a bit of sex.
Okay, and Mark Butler on a similar theme, could the sterile British variant and its seed issues be a result of genetic drift from being on an island or an island population without variants from the European continent?
It's possible. I suspect it's actually that it's selection as a vegetable, because as a vegetable, if you want to reproduce it, they grow much better from the cloves. So I can see that if people really were growing it because they were hungry, then they'd have selected those clones that reproduce best vegetatively. So I don't think it's just genetic isolation in this particular case.
Okay.
Again, DNA may show different.
Excellent. And very quickly, one's just popped up, will your conclusions be influencing SSI feature? I guess that's one for discussion.
That's for NRW to decide.
Yes.
They would love to preserve vegetables, I'm sure.
I've got plenty else to do. All right, we're going to move on. One more appeared, but I think you might be able to access the Q&A and do that. You'll answer that yourself.
Thanks very much then. I'm off for a leak now.
Thanks, Tim. Brilliant.